shouldn't be surprised at a successful disabled person. We shouldn't be making assumptions about intellect of disabled people and patronise. Like, so it's such a powerful way. The media, advertising, all of that stuff is such a powerful way to change perceptions. And, you know, if you're responsible with that power, you can, and forward thinking, you can really make a difference. And I think that's why I love this industry.
Emma, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, I am so looking forward to this chat because this conversation is not a topic that I have delved into on Disabled and Proud before. And I think it's going to be a really interesting one. And I'm really glad that you're coming on to talk to me today, because we are talking about you and your experience, but actually your experience as a mother of a disabled child, which is something that we don't really talk about that often. And yeah, I'm so looking forward to it.
Me too. Yes, me too. Thank you.
So let's start right at the beginning, because that's where all good stories start. When you were pregnant, did you know that you were carrying a disabled child?
No, not at all. So I had, as somebody that was fairly, I wouldn't say unhealthy, but, you know, had my fair share of vices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my pregnancy was, I suppose, like super easy. Like as much as I thought I would find being pregnant harder, just because I wouldn't be able to drink and all of this sort of stuff. And but actually, my pregnancy was textbook, and Dottie was born on her due date, which is quite rare, as is she, beautifully rare. But I remember so many people sort of almost quibbling that once she was born, because she was everyone thought she was premature for various reasons. But so really I think I thought I would struggle with pregnancy just because I didn't like the idea of being pregnant, but I was probably the it was sort of like this I sort of breezed through it, really. It was and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being pregnant. I wouldn't necessarily do it again, but it was it was a fairly uneventful pregnancy in that respect.
Yeah, and I think that that's so interesting that Dottie was born on her due date, because so many people are not, and like at all, and that is like a super rare thing to like, I actually came on my due date, and be like, what? Like, it doesn't happen.
I know, and my sort of background is in advertising and production and project management, so I used to always say she was on time and on budget. She's definitely not on budget. Who am I kidding?
And so when you had Dottie, and obviously like you've had labour, you've had your baby, everything is like going swimmingly, at what point was it brought to your attention that she might be disabled?
So I think it's really interesting, because I've sort of reflected a lot now that she's 10. I've reflected a lot, and sort of I've definitely sort of evolved my thinking and perception of disability as a direct result of being Dottie's mum. But I think when she was first born, for the first sort of 5 months, we were in and out of hospital a lot. And it wasn't like we were told in that time, oh, she's disabled, or she has this condition, or it was sort of a really weird mix of what's happening, panic, sort of worry. And it was really stressful time, because we sort of didn't really know what was happening with her. And I think when you're in that situation and you're in hospital a lot, and there's a lot of kind of worry, those sort of first 5 months were a real blur. And I definitely was struggling with my mental health postpartum. I think mental health is something that I sort of live with anxiety and depression, so like that's something I've always had, but it was off the charts, let's say, at this point, you know, hormones and stress and worry. So at that point, there wasn't really any kind of like, oh well, she has this condition or she's disabled. So really, it wasn't until she was probably about one, things sort of calmed down. She was about one. And then the sort of GPs or pediatricians or whatever was sort of started talking about her development and the fact that she was, not necessarily hitting milestones or things like that. So it was around about the time between she was 1 and 2 where we started to sort of look at, okay, what would help Dottie? What's going on in terms of, her development? What might she need? What can we do? All that sort of stuff. So it for me, it was kind of a real slow progress to diagnosis, if you like, or to understand that Dottie's made the way that she is, and that's absolutely fine and fantastic. But those sort of first couple of years were very uncertain, and there were lots of different healthcare professionals, and people generally putting their perceptions onto us as a family. And I think one thing I resisted before I probably even acknowledged that Dottie was disabled, one thing I resisted was that this was sad or something that was going to be
like a tragedy.
Yeah, like we were sort of stuck in this narrative of grief because we were having such a tough time. And it was tough, don't get me wrong. Like no one wants to sort of not know what's happening with their children or themselves or whatever. But actually for me, once she was diagnosed, that was almost a point of relief. Because then it's sort of, and again, it does speak to kind of how we view disability, particularly within parents and sort of that newborn phase. I think for a lot of our peers and people having children around us, it was almost like what we were going through was their worst nightmare, and to some extent it would be. You don't want to be in and out of hospital with a newborn or whatever. But I think for us, certainly started to see Dottie as Dottie. And it wasn't our worst nightmare. All I wanted really was to know how to support Dot, what Dot would need, and how we could then kind of move forwards, and really resisted that sort of pity that the disabled community I know talk about a lot. That's sort of thrust upon upon people, whether it's good willing or not. And so I think I realised early on that I'm not sure I understood why I was doing that, and I didn't sort of relate it to, okay, this is about the perception of disability in society and all of the bias. I hadn't reached that point yet, but I definitely was resisting that she was somehow not who she was supposed to be, or not what we wanted, or not what So it's difficult, because whilst I think there is grief involved in some of those processes, I certainly wasn't grieving for the child I thought I was gonna. Do you see what I mean? Like there's this sort of like...
I completely understand what you're saying, because it's like there is no tragedy in this because Dot was born as exactly who she was meant to be. But because of like outside perceptions and also spending time in hospital, and it, hospital isn't actually like a nice place for anybody to spend. Like nobody wants to go into hospital, like regardless of what age you are, it is scary as shit. And particularly doing that with a baby who can't advocate for themselves, can't speak, can gurgle and just about poop. It's terrifying, because they can't communicate to you if it hurts, if it's painful, if they're scared. You're going to get a couple of cries at best. So I completely understand what you're saying in that, yes, you had to be in those spaces, but actually like it wasn't a tragic event that suddenly there was a diagnosis and something's not quite right. And that all plays into that like massive trope that we have as like a society that, being disabled is the worst thing in the world. And it fully plays into that. But I completely understand what you're saying. You're resisting that exact trope, because actually your daughter is alive and she's, and that's like a lot of people say that. Yeah, exactly. A lot of people say that, like they just want their happy and healthy baby. And you had that, but because of how society perceives disability and, different conditions, it meant that it was a scary time, because all of these views left, right and centre, as you said, not just from the medical field, from other people around you as well, like inputting their own views onto you,
Yeah.
must have been quite a turbulent time. So like I completely understand why you would resist that trope.
Yeah. Yeah. And there were moments where, like, she was definitely, after those sort of 5 months, generally happy and healthy, right? But there were moments, obviously, where, and all the testing, I think I struggled with the testing process quite a lot, because one, I wasn't really sure. There's
Yeah.
not really a lot of education when you're in those. You're just expected to sort of, hand them over,
Yeah.
prod, prick, and I think I found that really hard. And it got to the point, I think, when she was diagnosed, um, I remember talking to Mark, my ex-husband, Dottie's dad, who is fantastic. I remember saying, "This is it now. No more tests. Like, if we don't get anything from this,
Yeah.
then I'm very prepared for this to not happen again. Like, I'm happy with that," because there was a point where I just wanted to stop her being pushed and pulled, and
Yeah.
what was the information going to give us? Probably like a sense of, okay, it's this, so we can move forward. But actually, I didn't want to keep putting her through rounds and rounds. If it was, if she was rarer than the rarest, then great. That's just
Yeah.
another bonus. Another
Yeah.
thing that's great about her. But yeah, we did get diagnosis, and it helped to some extent. But actually, um, it's good to have a label from a medical perspective and from a care perspective, and all of the things that come with parenting a disabled child. But really, I think it allowed me to go, okay, these are the sorts of things Dot's going to need growing up. These are the sorts of things that I'm going to agree with or disagree with, and we're going to sort of make our way through it. But
Yeah.
really, I don't talk about her diagnosis. I used to a lot when I wasn't quite, I suppose, as up to speed on, again, things like autonomy, and I've learned a lot about that as a parent, sort of over the last sort of 8 years. She's disabled. That's who she is.
Yeah.
And no one else really needs to know more than that. And I would say, for me, I don't need to know more than that either. Like, I need to know what potential things to look out for, but really, I'm not like, yeah, I'm not in big sort of, I don't know, diagnosis groups or stuff like that, because I find those spaces still hard to be in,
Yeah.
because depending on who you are, you might still be in a situation where you're centering yourself and your own perceptions of disability versus kind of acceptance and celebration and all of the things that I associate with Dot and being her mum.
I really love what you said about essentially not wheeling out her medical diagnosis for like
Yeah.
everybody, because you're right, there is so much to be learned in autonomy, and it's not necessarily, you're not given a handbook. And I think everybody needs to like really get this clear in their brain. If you are disabled, or you acquire your disability, or like yourself, you become a mother of a disabled child, you are not given a handbook on how this works, and what is perceived as good and what is perceived as bad, or what's good practice or what's best practice, or we don't necessarily share this information or whatever. Like, that handbook does not exist. And so you're very much like on a learning curve, pretty much from, I was about to say day dot, and then I was like, that's really funny.
That's what it was.
But you're very much on a learning curve from the word go, because not only are you learning how to navigate the world now that you're a mother, amazing, we love being mums, but also you're navigating a disabled child, which is a little bit different. And like you said, you don't want to be talking about this tragic trope that seems to happen a lot, but you still got to learn about disability in a way that's going to empower you, but also empower Dot as well, because actually at this point in time, it's not just about you. There is somebody else that is also involved in this, and how you react and talk about her disability to her is going to shape how her own view of her own disability is formed, and how she then can view the outside world, which, as I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, God, that's so much pressure.
I mean, I think you also get swept away in the beginning with thinking about what it means for yourself and your family, as opposed to like the center, like Dot, this is about Dot's life. So there were moments where I just wasn't equipped to know how to answer a lot of questions. And let's face it, people are so nosy unnecessarily, right? If you
Yeah.
get married, when are you going to have a kid? Are you pregnant yet? If you're pregnant, what are you having? You can have a home birth. You know, oh, what is your kid been in hospital? What's wrong with her? There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with her. What's wrong with you? You know, it's like, so people are so nosy,
Mm-hmm.
intentionally or not, that I remember sort of in that really sort of I would say hard phase right at the beginning when we were in and out of hospital. I remember saying to my friend, like, what do I say when someone asks me how Dot is? Like, what do I say? Because I would either say, I'd reel off exactly what had happened and sort of, you know,
Yeah.
tell them I was terrified, and all they wanted was like, okay, you know, we're at the coffee machine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd just overshare and like burst into tears, or I'd sort of wig out and be like, oh, look over there. So I sort of didn't really know how to behave. And
Mm-hmm.
Jane, I remember this is my very close friend Jane, she said to me, just say she's fantastic, she's my world. And that is a true answer. And
Yeah.
that's what stayed with me from, you know, Dot being 4 or 5 months old to now. That gives me goosebumps, because I think I've gotten much better at understanding why I don't owe anyone any information, but
Mm-hmm.
also that it's not my information to give.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm much better at sort of responding, and not all of those moments need to be educational either. You can sort of be a bit
Yeah.
pissed off with some people, depending who it is. But, you know, do you mind me asking this? Yeah, I do. You don't need to know that. Or, you know, but
Mm-hmm.
I always come back to, hey, how's Dot? She's fantastic. Look at her. She's an
Yeah.
icon. Like,
Yeah.
and she is, you know, she's literally the best thing that's happened to not just me, a lot of people in our lives.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's kind of what it comes down to. But you do really, or I certainly did, go on a steep learning curve, and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, got called out for it online a couple of times. And I sort of got stuck between this in the beginning, that sort of like advocacy parent bit, but
Mm-hmm.
without really understanding. I just sort of went into it a bit kind of naive, is what I would
Yeah.
say. You know, I didn't think I was doing it wrong, because I didn't
Mm-hmm.
think I was not being sad or whatever, but I still hadn't really educated myself enough to be in some of
Mm-hmm.
those spaces. And like you say, it's a baptism of fire, and there's no rule book. And in a way, I can't regret those things, because all of those things have led kind of to what I'm doing now, I suppose,
Yeah.
and how I feel now. And there's always something. There's, you know, I don't know everything, and I'll bull something up, I'm sure, again and
Yeah.
again. But I suppose, yeah, it's about understanding what I can speak on, and what's
Mm-hmm.
not for me to share, really.
Yeah. I can really resonate with what you said about, like, I don't have the answers for everything, and I also won't
Mm.
ever be able to know everything, because I think about that quite a lot, particularly in this sphere. So I am very lucky that I get to have these conversations and people give up their time to talk to me, but like, I don't have all of the answers when it comes to disability, and I will and have got things wrong,
Mm.
but it would be really futile for me to think that I wouldn't get things wrong, because I'm
Yeah,
not going to be right 100% of the time. And how my life has been and how it's shaped and changed my view of the world is going to be very different to someone who has a similar disability to me but's had a different upbringing or different lifestyle. So I completely understand that need for being like, actually, like, I don't have all the answers, but I'm more than willing to educate myself on the
yeah,
things that I don't necessarily know everything about. And actually, I'd love to talk to you about that education, because I'd love to know, like, where did you go to find out information? Like, what were your sources of information? Where did you learn from? How did you learn? Like, because I don't think those resources are necessarily out there. You have to really dig deep to find the
yeah,
information you're looking for.
yeah. Like, I mean, the first thing, I suppose at the time, the internet, it was my best and worst friend.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I'm a terrible sort of self-diagnoser on the internet and things like that. So I can go to dark places on the internet very
Yeah.
quickly. But really, I think it was when I sort of started to fall in love with Instagram and connect with people on Instagram. I
Mm-hmm.
genuinely, that was where I hung out from. Yeah, I was already there, but that's where I started. And I worked
Mm-hmm.
in the creative industry And so really wanted to find creativity in disability. I wanted to find disabled people that were doing cool things. And I'd actually met somebody through work, Suleiman Arkan, who is an incredible activist, disabled, incredible, amazing man, wise wisdom. And I became firm friends with him very quickly, and we worked together when I was still in advertising. And finding people like Suleiman that would not educate me, because it's not anyone else's job to do, but that I could be around and learn from, just by hanging out and not breaking through some of those, I suppose, perceptions of barriers. And I don't think I ever found it awkward as such. I know quite a lot of people talk about that, non-disabled people talk about fear of getting it wrong. Like I'm always afraid of getting stuff wrong. But to be honest, I wasn't afraid of interacting or talking or any of those things. I was fairly comfortable with all of that, and as we should be. But that's sort of a bit of an excuse, I think, that's used quite a lot, and I sort of understand where it comes from. But yeah, I really just wanted to make friends, and also I wanted to make friends with, because I was kind of not from an early age, but I always sort of saw Dot as being quite creative, and as she's grown up, she's got her sort of like fashionista ways. She loves color, so I don't know. I'm a creative person, and I wanted to find people in that space, and then that's how it worked. And I would do a lot of reading. I've read a lot of different books written by disabled people and parents and carers and blogs and all that sort of stuff. But I think all the way through that, and I still do it now because it's part of my job and my work, I sort of note when I learn a really important lesson all the way through. And I remember following, when I found Ableism is Trash on Instagram. It's like one of my favorite accounts. And although I started sort of talking about Dottie very differently and using different language, I would still, let people, or I'd still answer questions around, well, what is her age? How old is she? So I'd be like, oh, she's 8. But what is she like? Is she more like 2? Or people are obsessed with like benchmarking or measuring, or when people say, oh, this is my son, he's severely autistic. And it's like, well, why do we need to say severely? Why do we even need to say autistic? This is Dave, my son Dave. And it was those sorts of things. I would still be answering questions, even though I wasn't using some of those things. I started to think, whoa, we're doing this, we're perpetuating this. I would let medical professionals like ticker in certain bits and bobs, and it's like, again, I just found these spaces where I'd go, that's a brilliant lesson to learn, and apply it directly. And I think the World Wide Web was where I went, and where I still hang out, because it's where you can find anything and everything. But it was connecting with people, disabled people, of whom I have now a huge amount of brilliant friends, that I found by being Dot's mum. And that's, I always sort of talk about it as like Dottie was probably the catalyst to a lot of decisions and paths that my life has taken. But I'd say the same thing for a lot of the friends and people around me. They've really influenced my life for the better. And I'm just so grateful for that. I'm thankful for it. I would never have had that, if I hadn't had little Doris.
What I really heard from what you were saying, so like what really rung in my head was, it was almost like a process of osmosis, by just being around like disability and kind of like viewing it for what it is, rather than putting like a trope on it or looking at it through like a different lens, or almost trying to be like an ally. You were just there like absorbing it and learning it and seeing it and having conversations. And like you said, it wasn't like educational conversations, it was just like conversations between two people. And sometimes that is definitely the best way to learn, I think, because I was someone at school who was absolutely fucking abhorrent at school. Like, it wasn't for me. Like, I didn't like teachers didn't like me. I really struggled with like the idea of like why someone would have power over me and like let me go to the bathroom, stuff like I really struggled with all that kind of stuff. And people thought I was annoying, and like as I've got older, it's because I have ADHD. Are we surprised? No, we're not. Like, but I totally understand, because the best teachers that I had were those who would just have a conversation with me rather than try and speak down to me or try and like enforce their viewpoints on me, because I would resist that. So the idea that we learn best by that practice really rings true for me, or like me in particular. It might not for anybody else, but it really does for me. And I think there's so much to be said in just having a conversation and actually not wanting something from the conversation, like not going into it being like, I want to learn about this, boom.
Yeah.
And actually just being like, I just want to have a cool conversation and just see what happens.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think by doing that, like I've learned so much about myself.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned, because, you know, we talk about this with Not For, and you know, we've worked together before. We know that disability and disabled people are all individuals, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no monolith here. And I think the more people that I've spoken to, the more I've started to realize that, and I know I realized it quite a long time ago now, but that disability is vast. And actually it made me reflect on, okay, what's going on with me? What's going on that's less apparent? What, you know, is happening behind the perception, or my perception of disability? And it's really challenged those things. And I think, you know, the work that I do in this space now, when we talk about disability, we talk about representing disabled creatives. We're including in that neurodiversity, mental health, less apparent, chronic conditions, you know, and obviously visible conditions, and people understanding that as well, and people, however they identify, even within those different communities within, you know, this space, is always different and individual. But I suppose, there's been a huge learning curve for me, and I love it because it's making me question things I would never have questioned before, and to meet different people. They're the people that help you kind of understand that by, like you say, osmosis, really, and just learning from being around different people. And also, it's great, it's exciting. Like meeting
It
new
is.
people.
It is, and it's about having those conversations that you wouldn't necessarily normally have with your friends down the pub, because actually they're not going to be the ones that necessarily like grow your mindset. Not that this is all about like have a growth mindset, but actually like having those conversations where you're sat and maybe they're not the most comfortable for you to listen to are the ones where you grow, because it's called growing pains for a reason. It's not called like enjoyable growing. Like, that doesn't exist. Like it's uncomfortable for exactly. Like it's uncomfortable for a reason, and that reason might be because you need to do some work, or you need to listen, or maybe realize how your perception of something perpetuates a bad or like a negative trope around disability. And I think there's so much to be said for that. But actually, like you've mentioned your work a couple of times, particularly with Not For, and I was wondering if you could kind of tie in how with Not For and being a parent to a disabled child kind of like ties together quite nicely.
I think being, you know, Dottie's mum has sort of led me directly to this path. So I think when I left advertising, I wanted to do something in, you know, this space, and I wanted to do it with disabled people, not for them. And I think my background is in creative. So for me, it's like this amazing expression of the two things coming together. And the fact that I get to do that is beyond mine, you know, like exciting to me. But I think as a parent carer as well, like I genuinely feel a responsibility to, and there is a sense of pressure to represent, you know, someone that is understanding of not what the rules are, but like what my place is. Do you know what I mean? Like in that sort of like, I don't want to sort of be up here stepping into a spotlight, talking, you know, using Dottie as a vehicle to do that, or her information, or taking up space. And I think that's why how With Not For works, and how Kelly and I founded it, is that I don't feel the need to sort of, it doesn't rely on Dottie. And, you know, for me, that's brought me to where I am, and I'm incredibly proud of her. And you know, she does her own work and all that sort of stuff at 10. But she's a huge driving force, but I don't need to leverage that. You see what I mean? And I think that actually the business is about representing and enhancing or building opportunities for disabled creatives, established ones, emerging ones. And really, I think whenever I'm sort of asked about my experience, I'm very happy to talk about, being a parent carer and some of the things that we've talked about today, but also just trying to sort of open mindsets a bit around that journey and kind of how it can be easy to stay in a space where you might not necessarily realize that you're perpetuating harmful tropes or you know, maybe overstepping in terms of autonomy and things like that. So but I struggle sometimes, though. You know, my voice shakes when I talk about it, as they say, because I talk about, and I haven't talked about my mental health more as publicly for a long time. I did a lot pre-Dottie, actually, or more so, but it was another one of those things that started to get attributed to being a parent of a disabled child. Like, oh, I'm not surprised, you know, that you have anxiety and depression. It's like, well, no. Let's be clear, that shit was there already.
That's all me. That is 100% me.
So, if anything, gosh, you know, she's my tonic, Dottie. So yeah, I think some of the things that I speak on with Not For, I really am careful as to, am I in the right headspace for it? You know, I was nervous about coming on here today, so I really am responsible. I try and be responsible about those things, but the fact that I get to, you know, work in this incredible creative business and understand how I fit in it and all of the people I get to work with, that's a direct result of Dot. So, you know, I high five her on that regularly.
Yeah. Something that I'd actually love to ask you, and it's particularly as like a view as a parent, but also as a woman who works in creative working with disability, is how important is it for you to tell good, authentic, real representation of disability, not just for the business, but also for Dot when she eventually sees what you create?
Oh, so important. I think for so many reasons, because one, you know, working with so many disabled people, the thing that I hear a lot about representation is, you know, and Kelly, co-founder and CEO of WithNotFor, absolute powerhouse. She's always talking about the stories that aren't being told, you know, and I think you can't deny that. That's why we're still stuck in trope city, you know.
Yeah, and it's so true.
Yeah, because there's you know, if we think about it, there's so much untapped creativity and storylines and wonderful things that can be created. So every time we work with somebody new that's disabled, or we work with, you know, existing team and network, there's always somebody that says, well, I never saw myself, or I never, you know, felt represented, or I want to do this because this story hasn't been told. So you understand the impact that has, you know, and negatively without seeing it, and then the impact it can have positively when people do recognize themselves or see themselves in, you know, media or advertising that, you know, sort of projects a sense of inclusion for them and being seen. So I want that for Dottie 100%. But I also want it for non-disabled people, because I want them to understand, and, you know, everyone to understand, and that we shouldn't be surprised at a successful disabled person. We shouldn't be making assumptions about intellect of disabled people and patronize. Like, so it's such a powerful way. The media, advertising, all of that stuff is such a powerful way to change perceptions. And, you know, if you're responsible with that power, you can, and forward thinking, you can really make a difference. And I think that's why I love this industry, because you know, we just even think about like baby reindeer. The whole world is talking about baby reindeer for good and bad reasons, right? Well, we won't go into that, but that's the power of media, right? So we can, and representation or whatever, telling a story. And I think stories are important, and they reach and can reach way wider, than anything else. So yeah, and also it helps us understand ourselves on a different level, our own perceptions or similarities or human truths. I think that's the best thing about it. Like authentic stories is the only way, really, and that's where I hope we are moving beyond tropes in some areas. But yeah, that's definitely what representation looks like in our book at With Not For. It's that where are the untold stories?
Yeah, and they are so important as well, and being able, like you said, you spoke there about not seeing yourself and the power of seeing yourself, and what does that look like? And I like it really it really strikes a chord with me, because I think I have never really seen myself represented in like any form of TV show. I have never seen someone like me in a movie. I have never seen someone like me as a romantic love interest. I have never seen someone like me in a sex scene. Like, I've never seen someone like me who's good at sport but isn't a Paralympian. Like, all these tropes that we have really do come into play, and actually, like, it's so important to almost dismantle those tropes that we have, because actually they're so damaging, good and bad. Because good, it elevates people, amazing that people are getting the stage, but actually, what about the 99% of other disabled people who aren't Paralympians? Like, you can just enjoy sports, and there's so much to be said for that. But I do really think that With Not For really hits the nail on the head when it comes to its storytelling, and why it's so important, and particularly, like, for younger disabled people, I want them to have what I didn't have, because it can be really hard trying to see yourself where you're not seen, and almost becoming those things because you didn't see yourself there, so you have to become it so that somebody else can.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that's where it's not just the stories of representation, it's the representation of the breadth of disability, of intersectionality, of, you know, if you think about that, you know, there's so much that the industry has the power to impact and change and sort of help. So yeah, but yeah, it's really it's a huge part of why we do what we do, right?
yeah, very much. Like, why are we here? Like, such a deep philosophical question. I'd actually like to bring it back to you, though, as, you know, parent carer, and something that I'd like to, you know, touch on is, how do you make time for you, and like making sure you're caring for yourself? Because I know we love to throw this whole idea of like self-care is super important and it's a long bubble bath and all that bollocks, because actually that's not self-care. Self-care is actually doing the really difficult stuff that you don't want to do in the moment, but actually long term is going to be good for you. But how do you like almost take care of that whilst juggling everything else that you have going on?
Yeah, it's hard, and I'd be a liar if I said I was good at self-care. And I think part of that is sort of symptomatic of the let's just say additional load of being a parent, but also of a parent of a disabled child, that, you know, the systems that we are so stuck in and navigating are emotionally grueling. You know, they're traumatic, they're not fit for purpose a lot of the time, and it takes a hell of a lot of fighting to get simple, you know, things, to get access, to get equipment. And, you know, I'm grateful to live in a country where we have an NHS and all of those sorts of things, but it's hard. It's anxiety building. It's, you know, and I'm coming from a place of privilege of, you know, being a white, fairly well-spoken, slightly sweary, you know, person that can navigate systems like this. So I think that when there is extra time, it's often taken up, or, you know, and starting a business and all of that sort of stuff, and have a partner, and he's got two gorgeous girls, so we've got a blended family. So it's tough, and one of my let's say not so healthy traits is that I suppose part of how certainly my depression or anxiety can manifest will be just to keep going and keep going and keep going, to not deal so quite often I'll find myself in cycles of burnout or just, taking on so many things where there's just literally no room. And although I'm conscious of those things, I still don't really know how to stop them. So when I'm in a space like now. So this week I'm exercising, Brooke.
You're going for runs.
I'm exercising because I'm one of the people, and it's not a done thing for everyone, but running really helps me. I think it helps me literally get out of my head. But I'm really conscious as well as someone that lifts Dottie and is stuck in a system at the moment where we don't have the right equipment, and I'm putting a lot of pressure on my body because she is 10 and very long. Very long. So I'm conscious that I need to do some of those things, to take care of myself and to build strength. And I suppose it's that, and surrounding myself with good people. The best form of self-care for me is having people around me that understand how I work. And that will spot me, I think, and sort of step in a little bit when they can see I might be falling off or buckling under the pressure a bit. So I'm very lucky in that respect. But yeah, I mean, I wish I could tell you something much more profound, but I like to do a puzzle every now and again. I
love a jigsaw.
That's it. But yeah, and I suppose carving out time for Dot and I. But I would say I'm not advocating for divorce at all. But the fact that her dad and I do share weekends, I do have moments where I get a break from caring, which is also really important. But yeah, it's really about just trying to make sure I'm making space, or that there is space in a very full and busy life.
Something that you said there was about being stuck between systems that don't necessarily work. And like in my brain, I went straight to like the medical profession, because obviously that is generally quite often involved in disabled children's life. Like I know that it was involved in mine for a really long period, and I know that those spaces can be actually really difficult to navigate, and particularly as a child, when you don't necessarily have language to say that you feel uncomfortable, or you're not happy, or something doesn't feel right, or you don't have that. So as a parent, how do you find, or how do you advocate in those types of areas, in like the medical professions and in schools and with other outside agencies that aren't just like necessarily immediately involved in your life? How do you advocate for Dot in that space?
Oh, I think it's one of those things where you can quite easily be told what you need. And because again, like we all trust, well, we're all brought up to trust doctors and medical professionals and all of these things. And, to a large extent I do. And there are a lot of, situations where various specialists or people we come into contact with, might speak to me, and I'll say, oh, you can also speak to Dottie, or whatever. And there'll be some things that I'll talk about, but they can certainly say hello and ask her how she is and all those sorts of things. But then there are people, and I really struggle with this when you have multiple people feeding in at the same time, which we do and always will have. Is that if there is a difference of opinion, which there are many, you literally, what do? This person says this should be happening with her wheelchair. This person says actually it's because of that. This person wasn't in the last, conversation and wants to try something completely different. So you have to sort of find confidence and real grit, actually. And I don't like conflict. I hate it the older I get. But sometimes I almost get pushed to the point of getting angry or upset because people aren't listening, or will take it upon themselves to adjust something that I've spent, 20 weeks, 20 months trying to get set up in a certain way. You'll come home and it'll all be completely changed because someone's gone, oh, that's not right. So it's really tough because I have to be Dot's voice in certain areas quite a lot of the time. But I think it's having the real confidence and determination to say, no, wait, actually, I don't think that's going to work, and this is going to work better for her, or this is what she wants to do. So there are a lot of great people, but even the great people can confuse you and make you feel like you're doing it wrong, or that it's not going to be fit for purpose. So I think showing up and sort of making sure that you are prepped for those situations is the real advocacy bit, because otherwise she could be getting something that's going to do more harm than good, or she could be not feeling like she's the most comfortable or heard, or set up for success in that respect. So yeah, that can be emotionally challenging, but that's probably the biggest part, the most important part of my advocacy for her in those spaces is making sure we're heard.
Yeah. And that also, like, again, that does tie quite nicely. God, nicely? Jesus, that's disgusting. Does quite nicely into that self-care, because, like you said, like, that's like emotionally exhausting, and being able to know when sometimes you almost like you've had a bit too much. It's almost like you've had a bit too much screen time, so you need to take a break. But obviously screen time is very trivial in comparison. But having that ability to be like, do you know what, I just need like a little bit of space, whether that be like 10 minutes, I just need to go and breathe. I need to just take a hot minute because you're all pissing me off and you're not listening to what I'm saying, is actually quite a powerful thing to be able to do. And I think you're right. I think we are brought up to really trust doctors' opinions and medical professionals and other outside agencies that aren't just like doctors and nurses. We are brought up to trust them, and actually sometimes their knowledge of disability is so limited, because, as we've already said, disability is so vast, that actually what they think is going to be helpful is really actually quite the opposite. And so being able to have that time and space away and being like, I can stand up for myself in this situation and actually really advocate and use my voice for good is really powerful. So like, no wonder it is so emotionally exhausting.
And also, like, I think it's good for the specialists also to take a minute and recognize that they might be overpowering slightly, or they might be, because there are some brilliant people that we work with in terms of Dottie's care and her access needs and all of those sorts of things, but there are also some real kind of like railroaders. So like it's it's hopefully by resisting every now and again and sort of saying wait, they can see. I mean, that's the hope anyway, but some are beyond. Some are beyond that.
Sometimes some people aren't able to be saved. That is not a you problem, that is a them problem. I was wondering though, when it comes to this, like, you're kind of well versed in this now. You're 10 years in, and so like you kind of know how the system works, and you kind of get who's going to be involved, and what other outside agencies are going to be there, and doctors and nurses and all that kind of stuff. But if you had to give a piece of advice to any other parent carer about, like, or just like any piece of advice to them, what would that piece of advice be?
I think it would. I would say it would always come back down to, for me, how you respond in any situation. So whether that is what's being asked of you, what you're being asked, or what you're being expected to do, or what you're trying to do. If your child wasn't disabled, would you be doing it in the same way? Because if you put stuff through that lens, when we were talking about earlier, this obsession of sort of measuring how disabled or autistic someone is, we don't do that with non-disabled kids. We don't go, oh, some smug parents might be like, oh yeah, he can say a really long word at 2 months old, but really we don't go into school or friendship groups going, yes, little Larry, he's not intelligent, he's terribly we don't we don't do that, we don't benchmark, and if we do, then maybe we shouldn't. And I think that's the same thing about privacy, information, and what you're being expected to hand over. So yeah, just stop and think for a second. And I'd say that to not parents of non-disabled kids as well, before you ask that question, or before you ask anyone asks the question, would you be asking it if that person wasn't disabled? And how, if as a parent, how would I answer if my kid wasn't disabled? Would I answer? Is it an appropriate question? And that really does help me, because going back to that sort of advice I was given way back when, there is a very simple answer, a respectful answer for everything. And usually, how's Dot? She's my world. Because she is. She will never stop being that. So I don't actually have to give anything away or offer anything up. And would I do that if she wasn't disabled? Probably not. So yeah, that's I think the biggest thing that's changed my out view, and also I think my behavior, because you just start to be more mindful and respectful of yourself, and also therefore your child.
Yeah. I honestly could listen to you talk about this topic for a really long time, because I think the way that you talk about this is very calm and collected, and at no point is it like, and I think maybe this is again like kind of going through that like trope model. There's no angerness and there's no bitterness about what you're saying, whereas a lot of people I think can get really caught up in that and be really angry and really bitter about how the system has failed them and how this should never have happened, and almost like, why did it happen to me, and like, how is this, there's a lot of different tropes, and angry and bitterness tend to be quite similar, and they try to run hand in hand, particularly for quite a few disabled parents. Whether or not they would say it out loud or not is a different matter, but like I've been doing this long enough to know that it's a thing, right? Like I'm a disabled person. I know what I'm talking about. But I love how you're very, very like calm and collected, but also the way that you explain things is very accessible, because at no point have I misunderstood what you said, and I think that that's really valuable. And with that, how do you then instill a sense of disability pride into Dot? And I don't mean like into her as in like forcing it upon her, but how do you make it so that her world is about disability pride and not this disability tragedy? How does that look like as a parent who is also aware of all of the tropes that go on around that?
Yeah, well, I think, thank you for your compliment, first of all. I think just before I go into the pride question, I think one of the reasons I can speak calmly with you on this, and with some kind of like, because it's my experience now, and I suppose I've become more confident and equipped and able to talk about it. But I think I just want to touch on the parent care a little bit as well, because I think it really does depend as well on your child, their disability, and where you are at, right?
Yeah.
So, there are some conditions that are way over here compared to, Dot, and kind of what that means for a child and all that sort of stuff. So I think my experience is very valid for us, but also I think my experience is, I would say that it's in the majority of disability, right? It's not about a sad condition or anything like that. It's about if there were more of us in this space that weren't kind of worried or frightened or centering, or all of those sorts of things. So it really does depend on, I think, where you are in your own, or on your own journey of understanding disability and what that means for your child and their health and all those sorts of things. But disability pride is so. I mean, anyone that follows me or Dot on Instagram, I think for me it's about, so she's a wheelchair user, so anyone will know that when they see her, and she's got this kind of blonde, really sharp bob with a fringe, which I cut that hairstyle in very early on to stop her eating her hair, basically. But she loves it, and it's her kind of look. So I would say with Dottie, our approach to disability pride is about making it celebratory and colourful. So everything from her equipment to what she wants to wear. I give her a lot of choices. She's in sort of a grunge t-shirt phase at the moment, which I'm loving. But she'll do a bit of choosing with me. But yeah, like things like pimping up her wheelchair. She's got Izzy wheels. One of our first hoists we had, it was actually a bit of a bonding exercise with Adam's two girls. it's probably, I think this was in lockdown actually. We had like one of those portable hoists in the flat. And I let them decorate it with pipe cleaners and tape and washi, stickers and all this sort of stuff,
Yeah.
because it was a moment of, can I go on it? Can I go on it? Well, no, this is something for Dottie, and we made it colourful. And it's because it's, these things are often cumbersome and invented in the friggin' 1800s. So you've got to kind of make them part of your life in a way that you accept them, but also they become part of who you are. So for us, it's very much about the social model of disability. It's an identity. We are a disabled family, and that sort of is not really anything that you don't see in our sort of way of life. And I think color and sort of embracing our bonkers blended family is how we do it. And I love that about, it's almost comes to a surprise, to some people, but it's kind of, but I also like that as well, in your face. We're happy.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I do, because I think there's so much to be said in like the element of surprise when it comes to disability. And there's a lot to be said in the disability paradox, right? And I think actually a lot of what you said kind of plays into that, is that the idea that having a disabled life, or like being a parent carer, is the worst thing in the world. And actually when you're in that space, it's the complete opposite. And that's like the whole thesis, whatever, of the disability paradox, is that on the outside it looks terrible, but on the inside it's actually incredible. And like, we don't really talk about that enough. But I love that for you guys it's all about like that fun and like accepting where you are, but making it a part of who you are as well, and not shying away from that, because I think a lot of people can shy away from that, or let's put the hoist in like the corner so nobody can see it, and like having that almost like that disassociation. And so I think it's really powerful to be like, actually, we use this daily, let's make it pretty to look at, let's really bring it into our lives, and we can't get rid of it, so we've got to start to like it.
And I think that being open about that sort of stuff invites almost the conversation, not for it to always be about educating, but everyone around you becomes at ease with those things then, and it helps with people wanting to look after Dottie or care for her, or other kids coming round, and their understanding of disability becomes more advanced, because they know a disabled kid and they've seen a hoist, and they know what a wheelchair is for and isn't for, and stuff like that. So those things are really important. And I think for Doc to feel comfortable and safe, understood and fashionable, those are all the things that I think makes for a happy life here anyway.
I have genuinely loved this conversation, because I think it's not, like I said, it's not a topic that I've like touched upon on Disabled and Proud, and actually it's still one that I'm really glad that I had, because there have been so many things that you've said and I'm like, oh God, as a disabled child, I completely resonate with what you said, and I just think it's so great that we've had this chat, because it makes me really happy that we are able to kind of deconstruct that narrative of like, what's it like to be like a mother of a disabled child, and like, yes, it does impact your life, of course it's not gonna not, but actually, like you said, there's no tragedy here. Like, it doesn't, if you're looking for that story, it doesn't exist.
Like literally. And yeah, I mean, how could I not be the luckiest woman alive based on my kid? Like, I just can't see it. I mean, she's awesome, and yeah, there is no tragedy or what if, none of that exists here. And I think people should get their heads around that aren't in this situation as well, because that's also highly offensive when people sort of go down that route. But no, I think, thank you for having me on, because I don't talk about this sort of stuff, and as you know, I was bricking it. But yeah, it's been very easy to talk to you about it, because you're such a great host. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Emma. Appreciate that. But on a serious note, I do thank you for giving up your time to be have this chat with me. And I know that you were nervous about it, and I'm so glad that you did speak, because I think, like I said, you made everything super accessible, and it's been a topic that I've really wanted to talk about for such a long time, and I'm just really glad that you agreed to have this chat with me. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.